19-year-old Nora Fleming stared at the cold fury in her father's eyes as he slammed his fist against the dinner table, sending silverware rattling and glasses wobbling on the sturdy oak surface. The light of the oil lamp caught the gleam of tears in her mother's eyes, while her three younger sisters stared down at their half-eaten meals, too afraid to look up. "You've brought nothing but shame to this family." Henry Fleming's voice thundered through their modest home in Bonanza, Colorado, making the windows rattle in the cool April evening of 1882. Throwing away a perfectly good match with Richard Sullivan to chase after some foolish dream of teaching. A woman has no business filling children's heads with nonsense when she should be learning to keep a home. Nora's fingers clutched the worn edges of her copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer that sat in her lap beneath the table, her knuckles white with tension. "Papa, please. The school needs a teacher. Mr. Wilson is willing to train me, and I—" "Enough." Her father's face had turned a dangerous shade of crimson. Sullivan's offer was more than generous. His mercantile business would have secured this family's standing in Bonanza. Instead, you humiliated him and us by refusing his proposal in front of half the town. Her mother, Elizabeth, reached a trembling hand toward her husband. "Henry, perhaps if we don't defend her, Elizabeth." Henry's glare silenced his wife instantly. First, she spends all her time with her nose in books when there's work to be done, and now she's thrown away the best match this town has to offer. What decent man will have her now? Nora felt her throat tighten. "I don't wish to marry a man 30 years my senior who sees me as nothing more than a possession to display in his store. I want—" "What you want doesn't matter." Henry stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. "You're no longer welcome in this house, Nora. Pack your things tonight. Come morning, you'll either accept Sullivan's offer or you'll find somewhere else to live. I won't have your rebellious ways influencing your sisters." The silence that followed was deafening. Her mother's quiet sobs punctuated the stillness as Nora rose from her seat, dignity straightening her spine despite the tears threatening to spill. "Then I'll be gone by first light," she said softly, before turning to climb the narrow stairs to the room she shared with her sisters. Behind her, she heard her youngest sister, 12-year-old Mary, begin to cry, but Nora couldn't turn back. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders with each step she took. As night fell over Bonanza, Nora carefully folded her few belongings into a small carpet bag, 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's hand-me-down shawl, and the 3 precious books she'd managed to acquire over the years. Her sisters had fallen asleep hours ago, their soft breathing filling the darkened room as Nora penned a farewell letter by candlelight. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn when Nora slipped out the back door of her family home. The weight of her carpet bag, nothing compared to the heaviness in her heart. With no clear destination in mind, she headed toward the schoolhouse at the edge of town, hoping Mr. Wilson might offer some guidance or at least allow her to stay until she could formulate a plan. The morning air was crisp with early spring chill as she walked down Bonanza's Main Street. The town was still sleeping, storefronts dark and boardwalks empty. Only the saloon showed signs of life, with a few horses tethered outside and the faint sounds of a piano drifting through the swinging doors. As she passed the stagecoach office, a notice caught her eye. "Teacher needed, Pine Creek, inquire within." Pine Creek was a smaller settlement about 40 miles west of Bonanza. If she could secure the position, she might have a chance at independence, away from her father's disapproval and Richard Sullivan's unwanted attentions. With renewed hope, Nora adjusted her course and headed for the stagecoach office to inquire about passage to Pine Creek. The office wouldn't open for hours yet, but she could wait on the bench outside. As she approached, she noticed a tall figure emerging from the livery stable across the street, leading a magnificent Palomino horse. Even in the dim light of dawn, she could make out the strong silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat, shoulders broad beneath a well-worn duster. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, unlike the strutting peacock manner of men like Richard Sullivan. The stranger mounted his horse with fluid grace, but as he turned to ride out of town, the animal suddenly reared, spooked by something unseen. The man expertly controlled the horse, calming it with soft words Nora couldn't hear. Then, as if sensing her watching, he turned his head in her direction. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the empty street. Though she couldn't make out his features clearly in the half-light, something about his steady gaze made her breath catch. Then he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, before turning his mount and riding out of town at an unhurried pace. Nora stood watching until he disappeared from view, then settled onto the bench outside the stage-coach office to wait for opening time, her mind already racing ahead to what Pine Creek might hold for her future. The sun had fully risen by the time the office opened, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. Mr. Hobbs, the ticket agent, seemed surprised to see Nora waiting. "Miss Fleming, what brings you here so early?" "Good morning, Mr. Hobbs. I'd like to purchase passage to Pine Creek on today's stage if possible." The older man's bushy eyebrows rose. "Pine Creek? That's mighty unexpected. Does your father know you're traveling?" Nora straightened her shoulders. "I'm 19 years old, Mr. Hobbs. I don't require my father's permission." Mr. Hobbs looked dubious but checked his ledger. "Stage leaves at noon. That'll be $3. Nora's heart sank. She had only $1.75 to her name, money she'd carefully saved from selling embroidered handkerchiefs to ladies in town. "Is there perhaps a less expensive way to reach Pine Creek?" she asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. Mr. Hobbs scratched his chin. "Well, Jeb Taylor's heading that way with supplies. He sometimes takes passengers for a discount, but—" He glanced at her carpetbag and frowned. "It ain't proper for a young lady to travel alone with a man like that." "I'll take my chances with propriety over destitution, Mr. Hobbs," Nora replied firmly. "Where might I find Mr. Taylor?" With reluctance, Mr. Hobbs directed her to the general store where Jeb Taylor was loading supplies for his journey. When Nora approached the weather-beaten wagon, she found a grizzled man in his 60s securing crates in the back. "Excuse me, Mr. Taylor. I understand you're traveling to Pine Creek today." The old man turned, revealing a face lined with age and hardship, one eye milky with cataracts. "That I am, miss. What's it to you?" "I need passage there but can't afford the stage coach. I have $1.75. Would that be enough for a ride in your wagon?" Jeb Taylor looked her up and down, making Nora fight the urge to step back. "Might be. What's a proper young lady like you wanting in Pine Creek without family to escort her?" "I'm applying for the teaching position," she replied, clutching her carpetbag tighter. Taylor spat tobacco juice onto the ground near her feet. "Teaching, huh? Well, $1.50 will do, but I ain't waiting. Leaving in 20 minutes with or without you." Relief washed over Nora. "Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I'll be ready." The journey to Pine Creek proved more arduous than Nora had anticipated. The wagon had no springs to speak of, and every rut and stone in the trail sent jarring shocks through her body. Jeb Taylor wasn't inclined toward conversation, which suited Nora fine, as she watched the landscape change from the rolling hills surrounding Bonanza to the more rugged terrain approaching Pine Creek. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a distant rumble of thunder warned of an approaching storm. Taylor glanced upward with concern. "Gonna be a gully washer," he muttered, urging his team to pick up pace. "Might not make Pine Creek before it hits." Sure enough, they were still several miles from town when the skies opened. Rain fell in sheets, quickly turning the dirt road to mud. Nora huddled beneath her shawl, which provided little protection against the downpour. The wagon wheels began to sink into the mud, forcing Taylor to halt the team. "Can't go further in this," he shouted over the storm. "Wheels stuck and road ahead crosses Wilson Creek. It'll be flooded by now." Panic rose in Nora's chest. "What do we do?" "There's a homestead about half a mile yonder." Taylor pointed to a barely visible light through the curtain of rain. "Belongs to Jackson. Keeps mostly to himself. Not much choice but to seek shelter there till the storm passes." With the wagon mired in mud, they abandoned it after securing the horses. Taylor led the way through the driving rain toward the distant light, with Nora struggling behind, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step as it absorbed water. The homestead turned out to be a sturdy log cabin with a covered porch and a barn nearby. As they approached, the door opened, revealing a tall silhouette backlit by the warm glow of a fire. "Who's out in this weather?" a deep voice called. "Jeb Taylor and a passenger," Taylor shouted back. "Wagon stuck on the road to Pine Creek. Need shelter till the storm passes." The figure stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Come on, then. Get yourselves dry before you catch your death." As Nora crossed the threshold into the warmth of the cabin, she found herself face to face with the stranger she'd seen leaving Bonanza that morning. In the light of the fire, she could now see him clearly, a man perhaps in his late 20s, with weather-tanned skin, strong features, and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair was damp from where he'd evidently been caught in the rain himself earlier. "Miss," he nodded politely, then turned to help Taylor remove his sodden coat. "This here's Jackson," Taylor said by way of introduction. "Jackson, this is Miss," he paused, realizing he'd never asked her name. "Fleming," Nora supplied, her voice barely above a whisper as she shivered in her drenched clothing. "Nora Fleming." "Jacob Jackson," the man replied, his gaze assessing her with concern. "You're soaked through. I've got some spare clothes that might serve while yours dry." "They'll be too big, but they're clean and dry." Before Nora could respond, he disappeared into a back room, returning with a flannel shirt and canvas trousers. "You can change in there," he indicated the room he'd just left. "I'll see about some hot coffee." Embarrassed but desperately cold, Nora retreated to change. The room was sparse but neat, with a narrow bed covered by a handmade quilt, a small dresser, and a hook on the wall holding a gun belt. The window revealed the rain still coming down in sheets, illuminated occasionally by flashes of lightning. Jacob's clothes engulfed her slender frame, but the dry fabric was a blessed relief against her chilled skin. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs as best she could, then used a length of rope he'd provided as a belt to keep the trousers from falling completely off her hips. When she emerged, Jacob was setting out mugs of steaming coffee while Taylor warmed himself by the fire. Both men glanced up at her entrance, but only Taylor's gaze held the judgment she'd expected. Jacob simply nodded approvingly. "Better?" he asked, offering her a mug. "Much, thank you." Nora accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "I apologize for imposing on your hospitality, Mr. Jackson." "Jacob," he corrected with a slight smile, "and there's no imposition in helping travelers caught in a storm." His eyes studied her with quiet curiosity. "Though I admit, I'm wondering what brings a young lady like yourself to this remote stretch with only old Jeb for company." Taylor snorted from his place by the fire. "Says she's headed to Pine Creek to be their new school teacher." Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly. Pine Creek. They've been without a teacher since Mrs. Whiting took ill last winter. You have teaching experience, Miss Fleming. Please call me Nora, she replied, sipping the strong coffee. And no, not formally, though I've been assisting our teacher in Bonanza with the younger children. I was hoping to apprentice under whoever might hire me. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. Pine Creek's a small settlement, mainly ranchers and a few miners. They're decent folk for the most part, but isolated. They'll be glad for anyone willing to teach their children. You know the town well? Nora asked. Well enough. I do business there occasionally. Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he moved to the stove where a pot of stew simmered. You both must be hungry. It's nothing fancy, but it's hot. As Jacob ladled stew into bowls, the conversation shifted to more neutral topics: the unusual spring storms, the condition of the trails, news from larger towns. Taylor did most of the talking, while Jacob contributed occasional comments or questions. Nora remained quiet, observing her reluctant host. Despite his imposing height and obvious strength, there was a gentleness to Jacob's movements, a consideration in how he ensured his guests were comfortable. His cabin, though simple, was clean and orderly, with books lined neatly on a shelf beside the fireplace, an unexpected sight that made Nora's estimation of him rise even further. After they'd eaten, Taylor announced his intention to sleep in a chair by the fire. Jacob showed Nora to the small bedroom, insisting she take the bed while he made do with a pallet in the main room. I couldn't possibly take your bed, Nora protested. You can and you will, Jacob replied firmly but kindly. I've slept in far worse conditions than my own floor. Rest well, Nora. Morning will be here before you know it. Alone in the bedroom, Nora listened to the storm gradually subsiding outside. Her mind was filled with uncertainty about what awaited her in Pine Creek, but for the first time since leaving Bonanza, she felt a curious sense of peace. Perhaps it was simply the relief of having shelter for the night, or perhaps it was the unexpected kindness of a stranger with summer sky eyes. Dawn broke clear and golden after the night's tempest. Nora woke to the aroma of coffee and the sound of voices from the main room. She quickly dressed in her own clothes, now dry after hanging near the fire overnight, and emerged to find Jacob frying bacon while Taylor gathered his few belongings. Road should be passable by mid-morning, Jacob was saying. Creek will have receded enough to cross safely. Morning, Miss Fleming, Taylor nodded gruffly. I aim to retrieve my wagon soon as I've had some breakfast. We can be on our way to Pine Creek after that. Jacob turned from the stove, his expression carefully neutral as he greeted her. Sleep well. Very, thank you, Nora replied, suddenly shy in the bright light of day. I'm deeply grateful for your hospitality, Jacob. He acknowledged her thanks with a nod, then hesitated before speaking again. I've been thinking. The road to Pine Creek will still be treacherous after yesterday's rain, especially in Taylor's heavy wagon. I'm heading that direction myself this morning. I could take you on horseback. It would be faster and safer than risking the wagon. Taylor made a disapproving sound. Ain't proper for a young lady to ride off with a man she just met. Jacob's jaw tightened slightly. I wasn't suggesting anything improper, Jeb. Miss Fleming would ride buckskin while I walk alongside. We'd reach Pine Creek by early afternoon. Nora looked between the two men, considering her options. Taylor's wagon would indeed be slow going on muddy roads, and after yesterday's bone-jarring ride, the prospect held little appeal. Yet Jacob was essentially a stranger, despite his kindness. I would appreciate the escort, she decided finally, if you're certain it's no trouble. No trouble, Jacob confirmed, turning back to the bacon. We'll leave after breakfast. Taylor clearly disapproved but said nothing further, focusing instead on his meal when Jacob served it. They ate mostly in silence, the men exchanging occasional comments about the weather and trail conditions while Nora contemplated the path that had led her to this moment. After breakfast, as Taylor prepared to depart, he pulled Nora aside. "Listen here, miss. Jackson seems decent enough, but you best be careful. Man living alone out here, there's usually a reason. Could be running from something." Nora glanced toward Jacob, who was adjusting his horse's saddle outside. "He's shown me nothing but kindness, Mr. Taylor. Just saying," Taylor muttered. "Folks in these parts know not to ask too many questions about a man's past. You remember that." With that cryptic warning, Taylor set off to retrieve his wagon, leaving Nora with more questions than answers about her mysterious host. Jacob returned, carrying her carpetbag. "Ready to depart." "I've secured your belongings to the saddle." Nora nodded, following him outside where his Palomino horse stood waiting. Jacob helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. The gesture was brief and respectful, yet Nora found herself strangely affected by his touch. "Have you ridden before?" Jacob asked, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. "A little when I was younger," Nora admitted. "My father sold our horse when times got hard." Jacob nodded, taking Buckskin's reins to lead him. "He's gentle. Just hold the saddle horn if you feel unsteady." They set off along a narrow trail that Jacob said would lead them more directly to Pine Creek than the main road. The morning was gloriously clear after the storm, with wildflowers dotting the meadows and birds calling in the trees. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, Nora found herself enjoying the journey. "May I ask you something, Jacob?" She ventured after they'd been traveling for about an hour. He glanced up at her with those remarkable blue eyes. "You may ask. I might not answer." His honesty made her smile. "Fair enough. I was just wondering why you live so far from town." Most homesteaders at least cluster somewhat close together for safety. Jacob was quiet for so long that Nora thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured. "I prefer the solitude. Towns have too many opinions and not enough thought behind them. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not by rumors or appearances." "You sound as though you've experienced such judgment firsthand," Nora observed. Jacob's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Most have in one way or another. What about you, Nora Fleming? What drives a young woman to leave Bonanza alone, with nothing but a carpet bag and determination?" Now it was Nora's turn to hesitate. "My family said I brought them shame," she finally admitted, the words painful to speak aloud. "I refused to marry a man. My father chose a man 3 decades my senior who saw me as little more than a decorative possession. I wanted to teach instead. My father gave me a choice. Accept the proposal or leave." "So you left," Jacob stated, not a question but an acknowledgement of her courage. "I left," Nora confirmed. "Perhaps it was foolish to set out with so little preparation, but I couldn't bear the thought of being Mrs. Richard Sullivan, watching my dreams of education wither while I minded his store and bore his children." Jacob nodded slowly. "Not foolish. Brave." He glanced up at her, genuine respect in his gaze. Many would have surrendered to the path of least resistance. "My father doesn't see it that way. He believes I've shamed the family by rejecting a good match and harboring unnatural ambitions for a woman." "Some men fear what they don't understand," Jacob replied. "They mistake a woman's intelligence and independence for defiance, never considering that perhaps it's their own thinking that's limited." Nora stared at him in surprise. Such progressive ideas were rare in these parts, particularly from a man who otherwise seemed so traditional. "That's a rather enlightened view, Jacob. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I read a fair amount when time allows." "I noticed your bookshelf," Nora admitted. "Thoreau, Emerson, Whitman. Not typical frontier reading." "Books are good company on long winter nights," Jacob said. Then, after a pause, "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She believed education was as essential as bread." This small revelation, the first personal detail he'd volunteered, felt significant. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Jacob said simply, and Nora noted the past tense with a pang of sympathy. They continued in companionable silence for a while, with Jacob occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming plants and birds they encountered. Despite Taylor's warning, Nora found herself increasingly comfortable in Jacob's presence. There was a steadiness to him that inspired trust. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest and eat the bread and jerky Jacob had packed. Sitting on a fallen log while Buckskin drank from the stream, Nora watched Jacob kneel to fill his canteen. "May I ask what business takes you to Pine Creek?" she inquired. Jacob recapped his canteen before answering. "I own a small cattle operation. A portion of my herd winters on land near Pine Creek. I'm meeting my foreman there to help drive them back to my main ranch." "You're a rancher?" Nora couldn't hide her surprise. Somehow she'd imagined him as something else, though what exactly she couldn't say. "Among other things," Jacob replied cryptically. "Ranch keeps me fed, but I have other interests." Before Nora could inquire further, Jacob stood abruptly, his posture alert. "Someone's coming." Nora heard it a moment later, the sound of horses approaching from the direction they'd been heading. Jacob moved swiftly to Buckskin, untying his rifle from the saddle. "Stay behind me," he instructed quietly, his demeanor transformed from relaxed to vigilant in an instant. 3 riders emerged around a bend in the trail, rough-looking men whose appearances immediately set Nora on edge. They pulled up short at the sight of Jacob standing with his rifle, not aimed but ready. "Well now, what have we here?" The lead rider drawled, a man with a pockmarked face and tobacco-stained beard. His eyes moved from Jacob to Nora with an unpleasant gleam. "Ain't this cozy?" "Just passing through," Jacob replied evenly. "Heading to Pine Creek." The second rider, younger but no less unsavory, spat on the ground. "Pine Creek, huh? Might be heading there ourselves. That your woman?" "We're traveling companions," Jacob said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "And we'll be on our way now." The third man, who had remained silent, suddenly leaned forward in his saddle. "I know you," he said to Jacob, eyes narrowing. "You're that gunslinger from Wyoming. Jackson the Adjudicator, they called you." Nora felt her breath catch. "Gunslinger." She looked at Jacob, whose expression had hardened to granite, though he made no response to the accusation. "Heard you killed 8 men in Cheyenne alone," the man continued. "Thought you'd retired to raise cows." "You heard wrong," Jacob replied flatly. "I suggest you and your friends move along now." The lead rider's hand drifted toward his holster. "Maybe we don't feel like moving along." "Maybe we—" In a movement so fluid Nora barely saw it happen, Jacob raised his rifle and cocked it in one smooth motion. "That would be a mistake," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "A fatal one." A tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous shuffling of horses. Finally, the lead rider forced a laugh. "No call for trouble, we're just being neighborly." He nodded to his companions. "Come on, boys. Pine Creek can wait." The 3 riders moved past, giving Jacob and Nora a wide berth. Only when they were well out of sight did Jacob lower his rifle, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked Nora, turning to find her staring at him with new awareness. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "What that man said about you being a gunslinger?" Jacob sighed, securing his rifle back on the saddle. It's complicated. That's not an answer, Jacob. He met her gaze squarely. I was a lawman in Wyoming Territory for 3 years, marshal in a town that had seen too much lawlessness. When I finally hung up the badge, certain stories had attached themselves to my name, some true, some exaggerated, some pure fiction. And the name they called you, the adjudicator, a shadow crossed Jacob's face. Some newspapers have a flair for the dramatic. I never called myself that. Nora processed this revelation, understanding now why he preferred isolation. How many men have you killed, Jacob? His eyes held her steadily. Only those who gave me no choice. I never drew first, never shot a man who wasn't trying to kill me or someone innocent. He paused. But yes, I've taken lives. It's not something I'm proud of, even when necessary. Nora should have been frightened. A proper young lady would certainly retreat from a man with such a past. Yet instead of fear, she felt a curious sense of security. Jacob had had ample opportunity to harm her if that had been his intention, but he'd shown her nothing but respect and protection. "Thank you for your honesty," she said finally, "and for protecting me just now." Something like relief flickered across Jacob's features. "We should continue if we want to reach Pine Creek by afternoon," he said, offering his hand to help her up. As they resumed their journey, a new understanding existed between them, an honesty that, paradoxically, had strengthened rather than weakened the trust building between them. Pine Creek came into view shortly after 2 o'clock, a settlement smaller than Bonanza, with perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a main street. Unlike the bustling mining town Nora had left behind, Pine Creek had the quieter atmosphere of an agricultural community, with more corrals than saloons. "Town council meets in the back room of Macpherson's General Store," Jacob informed her as they approached. "Martha Macpherson serves as unofficial mayor. She'll be the one to speak with about the teaching position." Jacob led Nora directly to the store, a 2-story building in the center of town. As they dismounted, curious eyes followed them. Strangers were evidently uncommon enough to warrant attention. Inside the store, a robust woman with steel-gray hair pinned in a practical bun looked up from her ledger. Her sharp eyes took in Nora's travel-worn appearance and Jacob's presence with obvious interest. "Jacob Jackson," she greeted, her tone suggesting she knew him well enough. "Didn't expect to see you in town for another week." "Change of plans, Martha," Jacob replied. "I've brought someone you might want to meet. This is Miss Nora Fleming from Bonanza. She's interested in your teaching position." Martha Macpherson's eyebrows rose as she assessed Nora more carefully. "Is that so? Well, come into the back, both of you. No sense discussing business where the whole town can hear." In the store's back room, which doubled as a meeting space, Martha gestured for them to sit at a rough wooden table while she poured coffee. "Teaching experience?" she asked bluntly, setting a mug before Nora. "I've assisted our schoolteacher in Bonanza for the past year," Nora replied honestly. "I'm well educated, having completed all grades through 12, and I've always had a passion for learning and sharing knowledge." Martha sipped her coffee, expression thoughtful. "We've 15 children of school age here, ranging from 6 to 16. School's been closed since February, when Mrs. Whiting's consumption got too bad for her to continue. Parents are getting restless with their children underfoot all day." "I can start immediately," Nora offered eagerly. Martha glanced at Jacob, who had remained silent. "Vouching for her, are you?" "I am," he confirmed without hesitation. "Miss Fleming is intelligent and determined. Pine Creek would be fortunate to have her." Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's high praise coming from you." She turned back to Nora. "Position pays $30 a month. School comes with living quarters, just a small room attached to the classroom, but it's private." You'd be expected to maintain the schoolhouse, teach 6 days a week, and uphold moral standards befitting an educator. Nora's heart raced with excitement. That sounds more than fair. Martha said again. There is one other applicant, Reverend Hopkins' niece from Denver. She's due to arrive next week, has formal teaching credentials. Nora's hopes dimmed, but Jacob leaned forward slightly. Martha, you know as well as I do that if you wait for the Reverend's niece, these children will lose another month of education. Miss Fleming is here now, ready to begin. Give her a chance to prove herself. Martha studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. Always did have a soft spot for you, Jacob, heaven knows why. She turned to Nora. 2-week trial. If you prove satisfactory, the position is yours permanently. If not, you step aside for Miss Hopkins when she arrives. Fair, more than fair, Nora agreed quickly. Thank you, Mrs. Macpherson. Martha, please, the older woman corrected, standing. Let's show you the schoolhouse then. Jacob, you coming along? Jacob hesitated. I should check in with my foreman at the saloon. He's expecting me. He turned to Nora. Will you be all right getting settled? Of course, Nora assured him, though she felt a surprising reluctance to part ways. Thank you for everything, Jacob, he nodded, his expression unreadable. I'll stop by the schoolhouse before I leave town, to make sure you have everything you need. As Jacob departed, Martha led Nora out of the store and down the street toward a whitewashed building set slightly apart from the others. The Pine Creek Schoolhouse was a simple structure with a small bell tower and 6 windows. Adjacent to it was a tiny cabin that Martha explained served as the teacher's quarters. It's modest, Martha warned as she unlocked the door to reveal a single room with a narrow bed, small table with 2 chairs, a cookstove, and a bookshelf. But it's private and close to your work. To Nora, who had shared a room with 3 sisters her entire life, it looked like paradise. It's perfect, she breathed. Martha showed her the schoolhouse next, one large room with rows of desks, a teacher's desk on a small platform, a blackboard, and a pot-bellied stove. Like the cabin, it was dusty from disuse, but otherwise well-maintained. Classes usually run from 8 to 3, Martha explained. Younger children sometimes leave earlier. We have books, though not many. Most families provide slates for their children. What subjects were being taught? Nora asked, already planning in her mind. Reading, writing, arithmetic, of course. History, geography when materials allow. Bible study on Fridays. Martha paused. Mrs. Whiting also taught practical skills, sewing for the girls, basic woodworking for the boys. Nora nodded, making mental notes. I'll do my best to continue her curriculum while perhaps adding literature and natural sciences when possible. Martha's expression softened slightly. You're enthusiastic, I'll give you that. School can restart Monday. That gives you 3 days to prepare, and for word to spread that we have a teacher again. After Martha departed, promising to send someone with fresh linens and basic supplies, Nora stood in the center of the schoolhouse, scarcely able to believe her good fortune. Just yesterday morning, she had left Bonanza in disgrace, with no clear plan beyond escape. Now she had a position, lodging, and the chance to prove herself. She was sweeping the schoolroom floor when a knock at the open door made her turn. Jacob stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. You look like you belong here, he observed, stepping inside. Nora smiled, surprisingly pleased to see him again. It feels right somehow. I can't thank you enough for your endorsement with Martha. Jacob shrugged off her gratitude. I only spoke the truth. You'll make a fine teacher. He glanced around the room. Do you have everything you need to get started? Martha's sending over some supplies. I'll manage with what's available until I can acquire more. Jacob nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "This should help," he said, placing it on the teacher's desk. Nora opened the pouch to find $20 in coins. "Jacob, I couldn't possibly consider it an investment in Pine Creek's education," he interrupted firmly. "For books, supplies, whatever you need to teach properly." Nora was touched by his generosity but hesitant to accept. "You've already done so much." "I don't want to be indebted, no debt," Jacob assured her. "Just one neighbor helping another get established." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, I have a vested interest in Pine Creek having a good school." "Oh," Nora tilted her head curiously. "Do you have children attending?" "No," Jacob shook his head. "But someday, perhaps." Something in his tone made Nora's heart beat faster, though she couldn't have explained why. To cover her sudden confusion, she carefully retied the pouch. "Thank you. I'll use it wisely." Jacob seemed about to say something more when they were interrupted by the arrival of a young boy carrying linens and a basket of provisions sent by Martha. "I should let you get settled," Jacob said after the boy departed. "I'll be heading back to my ranch tomorrow with the herd." Disappointment washed over Nora at the thought of him leaving. "Will you be returning to Pine Creek soon?" "I come to town every few weeks for supplies," Jacob replied. "And my property isn't far, about 2 hours' ride northwest of here." Nora nodded, unsure why this information mattered to her. "Well, thank you again, Jacob, for everything." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good luck with your teaching, Nora Fleming. I have a feeling you're going to bring something special to Pine Creek." As he turned to leave, Nora called after him impulsively. "Jacob," he paused, looking back. "You were right. What you said to those men. You're not what the stories make you out to be." She met his gaze directly. "You're better." Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude for being seen as he truly was. He nodded once, then departed, leaving Nora with the curious feeling that their paths were destined to cross again. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity as Nora prepared for her first day of teaching. She cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized the meager collection of books, and created lesson plans for various age groups. Word spread quickly through the small community that a new teacher had arrived, and Nora received several visitors, mostly mothers curious about the young woman who would be instructing their children. By Monday morning, Nora stood nervously at the schoolhouse door as her students began to arrive. They came in family groups, some on horseback, others walking from nearby farms and ranches. 15 children, just as Martha had said, ranging from 6-year-old twins with matching freckles to a gangly 16-year-old boy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Nora rang the bell promptly at 8 o'clock, her heart pounding with excitement and trepidation as the children filed inside and found seats. "Good morning," she greeted them, summoning her courage. "I'm Miss Fleming, your new teacher. I'm very pleased to meet each of you, and I look forward to learning together." The younger children gazed at her with open curiosity, while the older ones displayed varying degrees of skepticism. Nora took a deep breath and launched into her carefully prepared introduction, determined to win them over with enthusiasm and genuine interest in their education. By lunchtime, she'd learned all their names and had begun to assess their various educational levels. The afternoon brought reading lessons for the younger children while the older students worked on geography. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Nora felt both exhausted and exhilarated. "Very good work today," she told her students as they gathered their things. "Tomorrow we'll continue with mathematics and begin a new history lesson." As the children departed, a tall, austere man in clerical attire appeared at the doorway. His severe expression and ramrod straight posture immediately put Nora on alert. "Miss Fleming, I presume?" he inquired, his tone as stiff as his collar. "Yes, sir. You must be Reverend Hopkins." The minister entered the schoolhouse, his critical gaze sweeping over the room before settling on Nora. "I understand you've been appointed on a provisional basis until my niece arrives." "That's correct, Reverend. Martha MacPherson has given me a 2-week trial." Hopkins made a sound that wasn't quite a sniff, but conveyed similar disapproval. "Martha sometimes acts hastily. My niece Catherine has proper credentials from a teacher's college in Denver." Nora maintained her composure despite her sinking heart. "I'm sure Miss Hopkins is very qualified. In the meantime, I'll do my best to ensure the children receive quality instruction." "Indeed." Hopkins fingered the Bible tucked under his arm. "I trust you're incorporating proper moral and religious education. These children need spiritual guidance as much as academic knowledge." "Of course," Nora assured him. "Bible study is scheduled for Fridays, and I weave moral lessons throughout our daily work." Hopkins seemed somewhat appeased. "Very well. I shall attend Friday's session to observe your methods. Good day, Miss Fleming." After the Reverend's departure, Nora sank into her chair, recognizing that she just encountered her first significant obstacle in Pine Creek. Hopkins clearly expected his niece to take over the position, regardless of how well Nora performed. If she wanted to keep her hard-won independence, she would need to prove herself indispensable to the community in the coming days. The week progressed better than Nora had dared hope. The children were responsive to her teaching style, and several parents commented on their children's renewed enthusiasm for school. Even 16-year-old Thomas Miller, initially the most reluctant student, showed interest when Nora introduced discussions of current events and practical mathematics relevant to ranching. Friday arrived all too quickly, bringing with it the promised visit from Reverend Hopkins. He sat at the back of the classroom, stern and watchful as Nora led the Bible study, carefully navigating the lesson to emphasize compassion and kindness while avoiding denominational controversies. When the school day ended, Hopkins approached her desk. "Your approach is unconventional, Miss Fleming. You permit rather a lot of discussion for a Bible lesson." "I believe children learn best when they engage actively with the material," Nora replied diplomatically. "By discussing the meaning of the scriptures, they internalize the lessons more effectively than through mere memorization." Hopkins looked unconvinced. "Traditional methods have served generations adequately. However," he conceded reluctantly, "the children do seem attentive to your instruction." Before he could continue, Martha MacPherson appeared at the schoolhouse door, her expression suggesting she had deliberately timed her arrival. "Ah, Reverend, just the man I wanted to see," Martha called. "Town council needs your input on the new cemetery expansion." "Miss Fleming, don't let us keep you from your weekend preparations." The dismissal was clear, and Nora gratefully gathered her things as Martha expertly steered the Reverend away, throwing Nora a conspiratorial wink over her shoulder. The second week of teaching proved even more rewarding than the first. Nora introduced new books from Jacob's generous contribution, organized a small science demonstration that delighted the children, and started a community reading circle for Friday afternoons after Bible study. Even the most skeptical parents began to warm to her methods as they saw their children's progress. Yet Nora couldn't help watching the stagecoach arrivals with trepidation, knowing each day brought Miss Hopkins' arrival closer. And while she'd gradually been accepted by most of Pine Creek's residents, Reverend Hopkins remained a formidable opponent to her permanent appointment. There was also the matter of Jacob Jackson. Though Nora told herself her occasional glances toward the northern trail were merely casual, she couldn't deny a flutter of anticipation whenever a rider approached from that direction. She found herself thinking of him at odd moments, his quiet confidence, his unexpected kindness, the complexity beneath his reserved exterior. It was Friday afternoon of her second week when the stagecoach from Denver finally arrived. Nora was helping the younger children with a special art project when 16-year-old Thomas Miller burst into the schoolhouse, breathless with news. "Miss Fleming, the Reverend's niece just got off the stage. She's talking to Martha at the store right now." The other children looked up in alarm, having grown attached to their new teacher. "Does that mean you have to leave, Miss Fleming?" asked 8-year-old Lucy Peterson, her lower lip trembling. "Not necessarily," Nora assured them, though her own stomach twisted with anxiety. "Remember, we still have our reading circle this afternoon. Let's focus on finishing our projects." Despite her outward calm, Nora's mind raced. Her 2-week trial ended today, and she had yet to hear Martha's verdict on her performance. If Catherine Hopkins had indeed arrived with formal credentials, Nora's position was precarious at best. When the school day ended, Nora dismissed the children with a brave smile, then sat at her desk, trying to prepare for whatever came next. She didn't have to wait long. Martha MacPherson arrived with a young woman who could only be Catherine Hopkins, a pale, thin creature with wire-rimmed spectacles and a nervous demeanor. Behind them came Reverend Hopkins, looking triumphant. "Miss Fleming," Martha began without preamble, "this is Miss Catherine Hopkins from Denver." Catherine offered a timid smile. "How do you do, Miss Fleming? Uncle William has told me about your temporary arrangement." Before Nora could respond, the Reverend stepped forward. "Now that Catherine has arrived, we can make the proper transition. I'm sure you understand, Miss Fleming, that qualified teachers are rare in these parts." "Indeed they are," came a deep voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see Jacob Jackson standing there, hat in hand. "Which is why Pine Creek is fortunate to have found one in Miss Fleming." Nora's heart leapt at the sight of him. Jacob looked trail-worn, as though he'd ridden hard to reach town. His eyes met hers briefly before he addressed Martha. "I understand the town council makes the final decision on the teaching position," he said. "Has that decision been reached?" Martha's expression was unreadable. "The council met yesterday. As a matter of fact, we reviewed Miss Fleming's performance over her trial period. And—" the Reverend prompted impatiently. Martha turned to Nora. "The children's progress has been remarkable. Parents have noted improved attitudes toward learning, and attendance has been perfect, unusual for spring when there's farm work to be done." Hope began to blossom in Nora's chest. "However," Martha continued, "Miss Hopkins brings formal qualifications that cannot be overlooked." The hope wilted as quickly as it had formed. "I propose a solution," Jacob said, stepping fully into the schoolroom. "Pine Creek is growing. The 15 students currently enrolled will likely become 20 or more by fall. Why not employ both teachers? Miss Fleming has proven her ability with the younger children, while Miss Hopkins could focus on advanced studies for the older students." Catherine Hopkins blinked in surprise. "2 teachers. Is that conventional?" "Conventional or not, it's practical," Jacob replied. "Many larger settlements divide their schools by age. Pine Creek could be forward-thinking in this regard." Martha's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "The budget would be tight, but with the new families settling north of town, it could work." She glanced at the Reverend, whose frown had deepened. "William, your niece would still have a position, a prestigious one, teaching the advanced students." Reverend Hopkins appeared torn between his desire to see his niece installed as the primary teacher and the practical appeal of Jacob's suggestion. "I suppose such an arrangement could be considered," he conceded reluctantly. Catherine herself looked relieved rather than disappointed. "I confess, The prospect of handling 15 students of varying ages was somewhat daunting. I specialized in higher education during my training. Martha nodded decisively. Then it's settled. Miss Fleming will continue with the younger children. Miss Hopkins will take the older students. We'll need to discuss classroom arrangements, but I believe this solution serves everyone's interests. She turned to Jacob with a knowing look. Quite the coincidence, you arriving just now. Jacob's expression remained impassive. Fortunate timing. When the others had departed to discuss logistics with Catherine and her uncle heading to the minister's home, while Martha returned to her store, Nora found herself alone with Jacob. You rode all the way to town just to intervene on my behalf? She asked, scarcely believing anyone would make such an effort for her. Jacob set his hat on a student desk. I heard in town yesterday that Hopkins' niece was arriving on today's stage. Figured you might appreciate some support. Support? Nora echoed, a smile tugging at her lips. You essentially restructured Pine Creek's entire educational system. A hint of amusement touched Jacob's eyes. The town was due for progress. Besides, I meant what I said. You're good with those children. It would have been a shame to lose your talents. Nora moved closer to him, suddenly aware of how much she'd missed his steady presence. Thank you, Jacob, for believing in me when most would have dismissed me as just a girl with impractical dreams. You're not just anything, Nora Fleming, Jacob replied softly. You're extraordinary. The word hung between them, charged with meaning beyond its simple definition. Nora felt color rise to her cheeks as Jacob's gaze held hers, intense and unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. I, was about to make some tea, she said, breaking the moment before her racing heart betrayed her further. Would you care to join me? You must be tired after your ride. Jacob accepted with a nod, following her to the small cabin where she busied herself with the stove and teapot. As she moved about the simple space, she was acutely aware of his presence, how he seemed too large for the modest room, yet somehow fit there perfectly. Your place is coming along nicely, he observed, noticing the small touches she'd added to make the cabin, her own wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains she'd sewn from fabric scraps, books arranged neatly on the shelf. It's becoming home, Nora agreed, setting 2 cups on the table. My first real home of my own. I never thought I'd have that. Jacob seated himself at her invitation. You've made quite an impression on Pine Creek in a short time. The reading circle especially, Martha says half the women in town attend. It gives them something of their own, Nora explained, pouring the tea. Many of these women have few opportunities for intellectual engagement. We're reading Little Women currently. It's sparked quite lively discussions. You bring light to people's lives, Nora, Jacob said quietly. Don't ever let anyone convince you that your ambitions are shameful. The echo of her family's condemnation alongside Jacob's affirmation struck Nora deeply. My father would hardly recognize me now, independent, employed, making my own decisions. Everything he feared for me. And are you happy with those decisions? Happier than I've ever been, Nora confirmed without hesitation. They talked for hours as afternoon faded into evening, sharing stories of their pasts that gradually filled in the blank spaces of each other's knowledge. Jacob spoke of his years as a marshal, the difficult decisions, the weight of responsibility, the eventual weariness that led him to seek a quieter life. Nora told him of growing up with the constant pressure to conform, to diminish herself to meet others' expectations. I received a letter from my mother yesterday, she admitted as twilight deepened outside her windows. My youngest sister smuggled it to the post office without father knowing. Jacob's expression grew concerned. Is all well with your family, as well as can be expected? Father still refuses to speak my name, but Mother writes that my sisters miss me." Nora traced the rim of her cup. She also mentioned that Richard Sullivan has already found himself a new prospective bride, the banker's daughter, barely 17. "Does that bother you?" Nora considered the question honestly. "Not in the way you might think. I feel relief for myself, but concern for her. She's so young and he's so controlling." "Some people never see beyond their own desires," Jacob observed. "Your father, this Sullivan fellow, they view women as extensions of themselves rather than as independent beings." "And you don't?" The question slipped out before Nora could reconsider its boldness. Jacob's gaze was steady. "I believe a woman's mind is her own, as is her heart. No one has the right to dictate either." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared values that went beyond mere friendship. Nora found herself studying Jacob's face in the lamplight, noting the small scar near his right eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested a younger, more carefree man than the one who sat before her now. The realization that she was developing feelings for him beyond gratitude or admiration came not as a shock, but as an acknowledgement of what had been growing since that first morning when he'd offered her shelter from the storm. Jacob Jackson was unlike any man she'd ever known, thoughtful, principled, respectful of her independence even as he offered his protection. Whether he felt similarly was harder to discern. Though his actions spoke of genuine care, Jacob kept his deeper emotions carefully guarded, perhaps from long habit or painful experience. "I should go," he said eventually, noticing the late hour. "You need your rest, and I've imposed long enough." "You haven't imposed at all," Nora assured him. "In fact, She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "I'm glad you came back to town when you did. Not just because of the situation with Miss Hopkins, but because I've missed our conversations." Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at her candor. "As have I," he admitted quietly. "My ranch feels a good deal emptier since I met you, Nora Fleming." The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, affected Nora more powerfully than any flowery declaration might have. Jacob wasn't a man given to exaggeration or empty compliments. If he said he'd missed her, he meant exactly that. He rose to leave, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll be in town for a few days, settling some business. Perhaps we might continue our conversation tomorrow." "I'd like that very much," Nora replied, walking him to the door. They stood for a moment in the doorway, the night air cool around them, stars beginning to emerge in the clear sky. Jacob seemed about to say something more, then simply nodded. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Jacob." As she watched him walk away toward the town's small hotel, Nora felt as though something profound had shifted in her world, something that had nothing to do with securing her teaching position, and everything to do with the tall, thoughtful man who believed she brought light rather than shame. Over the next 2 months, Pine Creek settled into new rhythms. The schoolhouse was divided to accommodate both teachers, with Catherine Hopkins taking the older students in the morning while Nora taught the younger children. In the afternoons, they switched groups, allowing each teacher to focus on their strengths, Catherine with formal academics, Nora with creative approaches to foundational skills. To everyone's surprise, the arrangement worked remarkably well. The two young women, initially positioned as rivals, developed a cordial working relationship that gradually evolved into genuine friendship. Catherine, though formally educated, lacked confidence in classroom management, while Nora's natural rapport with children compensated for her less structured background. They began to exchange ideas and support each other's methods, creating an educational environment that surpassed what either might have achieved alone. Nora's place in the community strengthened with each passing week. Her reading circle expanded to include discussion of poetry and current events from newspapers that arrived on the stage. She organized a small lending library from donated books, and when several mothers expressed interest in improving their own literacy, Nora began holding evening classes twice weekly. Through it all, her friendship with Jacob deepened in ways both profound and ordinary. Though his ranch responsibilities kept him busy, he made regular trips to Pine Creek, often timing his visits to coincide with community gatherings or special school events. They fell into a comfortable pattern of shared meals, long conversations, and occasional rides into the surrounding countryside when Nora's teaching schedule allowed. Yet neither had taken the step that would transform their friendship into something more declared. Jacob maintained a respectful distance that sometimes frustrated Nora, though she understood the caution behind it. His past as a lawman had left him wary of drawing others too deeply into his life, while her newfound independence made her hesitant to appear too eager for male attention after rejecting it so definitively in Bonanza. It was a golden afternoon in late June when circumstances finally forced the issue. School had just been dismissed for a 2-week summer break, and Nora was organizing materials for the new term when Jacob appeared at the schoolhouse door. "I thought I might find you here instead of enjoying your well-deserved vacation," he said, smiling as he entered. Nora looked up from the book she was sorting, pleased as always by his unexpected arrival. "Old habits," she admitted. "Besides, I'm planning some new approaches for the fall term." Jacob shook his head, his expression fond. "Always working. I've come to steal you away for the afternoon if you're willing. It's too fine a day to spend indoors." The invitation was too tempting to resist. Within minutes, Nora had changed into her riding skirt and joined Jacob outside where 2 horses waited his palomino and a gentle mare he often borrowed from a neighbor when they rode together. They followed a trail leading west from town, climbing gradually into the foothills where wildflowers carpeted the meadows and aspen trees shimmered in the summer breeze. Jacob seemed to have a destination in mind, though he deflected Nora's questions with enigmatic smiles. After about an hour's ride, they crested a ridge and Jacob reined his horse to a stop. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the vista before them. Nora gasped softly. Below them stretched a pristine valley, bisected by a clear stream that meandered through lush grassland. A small herd of cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and near a stand of cottonwood stood a cabin larger and more substantial than Jacob's first home, with a barn and corrals nearby. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed. "Whose property is this?" "Mine," Jacob replied. "Or it will be, once the paperwork is finalized next week. My main ranch is doing well enough that I can expand. This valley has good water, protected grazing, and it's close enough to town for convenient travel." Nora studied the peaceful scene, understanding why Jacob had been drawn to this place. "It's perfect for you." "I'm glad you think so," he said, his voice taking on an unusual hesitancy. "I value your opinion, Nora." Something in his tone made her turn to look at him directly. Jacob's expression was more open than she'd ever seen it, a vulnerability there that made her heart beat faster. "Jacob, is everything all right?" He dismounted, then moved to help her down from her horse. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately release her waist, keeping her close. "I didn't bring you here just to show you the property," he admitted. "I wanted to show you a possibility." "What possibility?" Nora asked, barely trusting her voice as Jacob's hands remained at her waist. "A life, together." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I've been careful not to presume, not to rush you when you're just establishing your independence. But Nora, these past months have shown me what my life could be with you in it, and I find I don't want to imagine a future without you." Joy flooded through Nora so intensely she felt lightheaded. "Are you proposing?" A smile touched Jacob's lips. "Inelegantly, perhaps. I'm not a man of flowery words." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Nora Fleming. Your intelligence, your courage, your compassion, everything about you brings light into a world that can be very dark. I'm asking if you might consider sharing your life with mine." Tears welled in Nora's eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "I love you too, Jacob. I think I have since that first morning in your cabin when you offered me dry clothes and dignity when I had nothing." Jacob's smile broadened, relief and joy transforming his features. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Nora confirmed, her heart overflowing, "though I have conditions." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "I would expect nothing less from you. Name them." "I want to continue teaching," Nora stated firmly. "At least until Pine Creek can find a suitable replacement." "Of course," Jacob agreed without hesitation. "Your teaching isn't just a job, it's your calling. I would never ask you to abandon it. And," Nora continued, "I want us to be true partners. Not husband ruling over wife, but two people facing life together as equals." Jacob nodded solemnly. "I want a partner, not a possession. Your mind and your spirit are what I love, Nora. I would never seek to diminish either." "Then yes, Jacob Jackson, I will marry you." He drew her closer, one hand rising to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Nora Fleming? I've been wanting to for longer than I care to admit." "Please," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity as she responded eagerly. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against his solid warmth as Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, then into his hair. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I had planned to wait to court you properly," he confessed. "But when I found this valley, all I could think was how perfect it would be for our home." "Our home," Nora repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." They spent the afternoon exploring the valley, with Jacob pointing out where he envisioned expanding the cabin, adding a garden, perhaps building a proper house someday. Nora offered her own ideas, delighting in how naturally they fell into planning a shared future. As they rode back to Pine Creek in the golden light of late afternoon, Nora felt a contentment she'd never known before. The path that had begun with her family's rejection had led her to this moment not despite their condemnation, but because of it. By refusing to accept the limitations they'd tried to impose, she had found both her calling and a love that honored, rather than diminished, her true self. News of their engagement spread quickly through Pine Creek, meeting with general approval and only a few raised eyebrows from those who found Nora's independent ways unsettling. Martha MacPherson, unsurprisingly, claimed to have predicted the match from the start. "Saw it the moment he brought you into my store," she told Nora with satisfaction. "Never seen Jacob look at anyone the way he looked at you." Catherine Hopkins was genuinely pleased for her colleague. "I admit I was terrified at the prospect of teaching alone," she confessed. "But now, I feel confident enough to continue without you, when the time comes." Only Reverend Hopkins expressed reservations, voicing concern about Nora's modern ideas influencing Jacob's household. His objections fell on deaf ears, however, as the community had come to respect both Nora and Jacob too much to be swayed by outdated notions of propriety. The wedding was set for August, allowing time for minimal preparations and for Jacob to complete work on the cabin in the valley. Nora wrote to her mother and sisters with the news, though she harbored little hope of reconciliation with her father. To her surprise, a response came not only from her mother but from Henry Fleming himself, a stiffly worded letter that stopped short of an apology, but expressed a grudging acceptance of her marriage to a man of property. He did not offer to attend the wedding, but neither did he explicitly forbid her mother and sisters from doing so. Elizabeth Fleming seized this slender opportunity, writing that she and Nora's sisters would make the journey to Pine Creek for the ceremony if Nora wished it. Though wary of her father's motivations, Nora couldn't deny her desire to see her mother and sisters again, and she replied with a heartfelt invitation. As August approached, Jacob and Nora fell into an easy rhythm of shared work and planning. When school was not in session, Nora often accompanied Jacob to the valley, helping to prepare what would become their home. They planted a garden, built additional shelving for Nora's growing collection of books, and discussed which furniture to commission from Pine Creek's carpenter. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the nearly completed cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and purple. Leaving Bonanza, defying your father's wishes, Nora considered the question seriously. "I regret that it caused pain to my mother and sisters, and I regret that my father couldn't see beyond his own rigid beliefs to recognize my happiness." She turned to Jacob, reaching for his hand, "But I will never regret choosing my own path. It led me here to you and to a life I never dared imagine." Jacob squeezed her hand gently. "Your father was wrong, you know. You've never brought shame to anyone. You bring light, Nora, to your students, to this community, to me." The simple declaration, so at odds with her father's harsh judgment, filled Nora with warmth. "And you, Jacob Jackson, have shown me what it means to be truly respected and loved for exactly who I am." The day before the wedding, the stagecoach arrived from Bonanza carrying Elizabeth Fleming and Nora's three sisters, Mary, now 13, Emily, 16, and Sarah, 18. Their reunion was tearful and joyous, with the younger girls exclaiming over Pine Creek and their older sister's transformation from obedient daughter to respected teacher and bride-to-be. Elizabeth embraced her eldest daughter with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "So very proud." "Even though I disobeyed father?" Nora asked, voicing the doubt that had lingered despite her happiness. "Because you had the courage to follow your heart," Elizabeth replied firmly, "something I never found in myself." She glanced around to ensure her younger daughters were out of earshot. "Your father is a hard man, Nora. I've spent 25 years trying to soften him with limited success. Seeing you now confident, loved, respected for your mind, I know you made the right choice, no matter what Henry believes." Meeting Jacob proved another emotional moment. Elizabeth studied him carefully, a mother's protective instinct evident in her scrutiny. Whatever she saw in him must have satisfied her concerns, for her expression softened into approval. "You love my daughter for her mind as well as her heart," she observed. "It wasn't a question." "I do," Jacob confirmed simply. "She's the most remarkable person I've ever known." Elizabeth nodded, satisfied. "Then you have my blessing for whatever that may be worth." The wedding took place the following day in Pine Creek's small church, with Reverend Hopkins performing the ceremony with stiff correctness, if not enthusiasm. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the simple building to capacity and spilling onto the steps outside. Nora wore a dress of pale blue silk that Martha and several other women had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of her mother's brother, who had accompanied the family from Bonanza, to give the bride away, her eyes found Jacob waiting at the altar. The transformation in his normally reserved expression took her breath away. Jacob looked at her with such naked adoration that tears pricked her eyes. This was a man who saw her completely strengths and flaws, dreams and fears, and loved all of her. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to respect, support, and cherish one another through whatever life brought their way. When Jacob slid the gold band onto her finger, a band he had commissioned from a Denver jeweler, engraved inside with the words, "You bring light," Nora felt the last shadow of her father's disapproval fall away. This was her choice, her path, her love, and it was right. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the town square. Martha had organized the entire affair with her usual efficiency, ensuring that Pine Creek's first major social event of the year would be remembered for years to come. Elizabeth and Nora's sisters remained in town for a week after the wedding, staying in Catherine Hopkins' spare room while Nora and Jacob began their married life in the Valley cabin. The additional time allowed for deeper healing of family bonds that had been strained by Nora's departure, particularly between her and Sarah, who confessed her admiration for Nora's courage. "I always thought you were just being difficult, refusing Richard Sullivan," Sarah admitted as they walked by the stream near Nora's new home. "But seeing you now with Jacob, I understand. You weren't rejecting marriage, you were waiting for a marriage that wouldn't diminish you." Nora squeezed her sister's hand. "There are good men out there, Sarah. Men who value a woman's mind as well as her appearance. Don't settle for less." When the time came for her family to return to Bonanza, the parting was bittersweet but hopeful. Elizabeth promised to write regularly, and Mary extracted a promise from her older sister to send books whenever possible. "Perhaps you'll visit Bonanza someday," Elizabeth suggested tentatively. "Your father, he may come around in time." Nora embraced her mother tightly. "Perhaps. And if not, know that you and the girls are always welcome in our home." As the stagecoach departed, Jacob's arm settled around Nora's waist, a solid presence of support and understanding. "All right?" he asked simply. "Yes," Nora replied, leaning into his strength. "Sad to see them go, but hopeful that we've built a bridge that might someday extend even to my father." Life settled into new patterns after the wedding. Nora continued teaching through the fall term while helping Catherine Hopkins prepare to take over the full school, once a suitable assistant could be found. In the evenings, she returned to the valley where Jacob would be waiting, sometimes with dinner already prepared, other times ready to cook alongside her as they shared the events of their day. Their physical relationship deepened alongside their emotional connection, with Jacob proving as considerate and attentive a lover as he was a husband in all other respects. Nights that had once been solitary for both became a cherished time of intimacy and discovery, with laughter and tenderness in equal measure. By November, as the first snows dusted the mountains surrounding their valley, Nora confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child. "Are you pleased?" she asked Jacob anxiously after sharing the news one evening before the fireplace. Though they had discussed children in abstract terms, the reality had arrived sooner than either had anticipated. Jacob's face transformed with wonder as he laid a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Please doesn't begin to describe it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Awed, terrified, grateful, all of those and more." Nora covered his hand with her own. "I'll need to leave teaching sooner than planned." "Only if you want to," Jacob assured her. "Many women continue their work well into pregnancy. Whatever you decide, I'll support." His unconditional support meant everything to Nora, who had grown up in a household where women's choices were severely limited. "I think I'd like to finish the term," she decided. "By then, Catherine will be fully prepared to take over, and the new assistant teacher should be settled." Jacob nodded, then gathered her into his arms, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something, Nora. This child and any others we might have will never hear that they've brought shame to this family. Boy or girl, they'll be raised to think independently, to question, to seek their own path." Tears welled in Nora's eyes at this implicit rejection of her own father's rigid parenting. "And they'll know they are loved unconditionally," she added. "Not for what they achieve or how well they conform, but simply for being exactly who they are." "Like their mother," Jacob agreed, kissing her tenderly. "Who brings nothing but light to everyone fortunate enough to know her. Spring arrived with new beginnings." Nora and Jacob's son, William Jacob Jackson, was born on a mild March day in 1883, with Martha Macpherson serving as midwife and Elizabeth Fleming, who had made the journey from Bonanza, despite Henry's continued disapproval, providing maternal support. The baby was healthy and strong, with a shock of dark hair like his father's and eyes that eventually settled into his mother's warm brown. From his earliest days, William showed signs of the curiosity and determination that characterized both his parents, observing the world with an alertness that delighted everyone who met him. True to their word, Jacob and Nora raised their son with a balance of guidance and freedom, encouraging questions and exploration while teaching the values of kindness and respect. Though Nora had officially retired from formal teaching, she continued to host reading circles and occasional special lessons at their home, with young William often perched on her lap or playing nearby. As their son grew, so did their ranch and their place in the community. Jacob's careful management expanded their cattle operation into one of the most successful in the region, while Nora's educational initiatives evolved into a small lending library housed in a purpose-built addition to the Pine Creek Schoolhouse. Together, they embodied a partnership that challenged traditional notions of marriage while demonstrating its strengths. In the summer of 1885, when William was 2, a letter arrived from Bonanza that changed everything. Elizabeth wrote that Henry Fleming had suffered a severe stroke. Though he had survived, he was greatly diminished, unable to speak clearly or manage the family's affairs. Elizabeth, suddenly thrust into the role of decision-maker, asked if Nora and her family might visit. "He may not have much time left," she wrote. "And despite everything, I believe he would want to meet his grandson." The journey to Bonanza was emotionally complex for Nora. As their wagon approached the town she had fled 3 years earlier, memories both painful and precious washed over her. The streets looked smaller somehow, the buildings less imposing than in her recollection. Richard Sullivan's Mercantile still dominated the main street, and Nora noted with a pang that the young woman sweeping its porch, presumably his wife indeed, looked barely out of girlhood. She said a silent prayer that the girl had found more kindness in her marriage than Nora would have. The Fleming home stood, as she remembered, a modest house at the edge of town, its paint peeling slightly, but its garden well tended. Elizabeth greeted them at the door, her face lined with new worries but her embrace as warm as ever. Sarah, now married to a local rancher, was there with her infant daughter, while Emily helped prepare the meal, and Mary, blossoming into a young woman at 16, entertained William with evident delight. Henry Fleming sat in a chair by the window, a blanket over his knees despite the summer warmth. The stroke had left one side of his face drooping and his once robust frame diminished. When Nora entered the room, his eyes, still sharp despite his physical decline, followed her movements with an intensity that made her heart race. "Father," she said softly, approaching his chair. "It's Nora. I've come with my husband Jacob and our son William." Something flickered in Henry's gaze, recognition, perhaps, or emotion too complex to name. With visible effort, he extended his good hand, the gesture so unexpected that Nora hesitated before taking it. His fingers closed around hers with surprising strength, and though his words were slurred, their meaning was clear. "You came back." "Yes, father, we came to see you." Jacob stepped forward then, William in his arms. With quiet dignity, he introduced himself to the man who had cast out his daughter, offering not recrimination but respect for a father's place in Nora's life, however flawed. "Your grandson, sir," Jacob said, bringing William closer. "William Jacob Jackson." Henry's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the child, tears that Nora had never seen in all her years growing up under his stern authority. With trembling fingers, he reached out to touch William's small hand, and the boy, usually shy with strangers, solemnly allowed the contact. That evening, after William had been put to bed in Mary's room and the family had gathered for a quiet supper, Elizabeth explained how Henry's illness had transformed not only his body, but his perspective. "He can't say much clearly," she told Nora and Jacob, "but he's had me write letters. He never sent letters asking your forgiveness, Nora. His pride wouldn't let him mail them, but the stroke, it stripped away that pride. When I suggested writing to you about visiting, he agreed immediately." Nora struggled to reconcile this vulnerable man with the father whose harsh judgment had driven her away. "I never wanted his illness," she said softly, "only his understanding." "I know, dear," Elizabeth patted her hand, "and I think in his way he understands now. Seeing what you've built, your marriage, your child, your place in Pine Creek, it's shown him that your path was right for you, even if it wasn't what he would have chosen." The visit lasted a week, days filled with the slow work of rebuilding family bonds and creating new memories to replace painful ones. Henry's condition precluded deep conversations, but his eyes followed Nora constantly, and occasionally he managed words that suggested regret and belated pride. On their final evening in Bonanza, as Jacob helped William construct a tower of wooden blocks on the parlor floor, Henry beckoned Nora to his side. With painful slowness, he formed 3 words that healed wounds she had carried for 3 years. Not ashamed, proud. Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she knelt beside her father's chair. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered, using the childhood name she had abandoned long ago. "That means more than you know." Henry nodded, then gestured toward Jacob and William. "Good. Man, good family." "Yes," Nora agreed, following his gaze to her husband and son, the family she had chosen and created. The best. When they departed the next morning, the farewells were emotional but not final. Plans were made for Elizabeth to visit Pine Creek in the autumn, and for Mary, who had expressed interest in teaching, to perhaps study with Catherine Hopkins when she finished her schooling. As their wagon rolled away from Bonanza, Nora leaned against Jacob's shoulder, William sleeping peacefully between them. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" Jacob asked, slipping an arm around her. "For giving me the strength to make peace with my past without compromising who I've become." Jacob pressed a kiss to her temple. "You always had that strength, Nora. I just reminded you it was there." The journey back to Pine Creek felt different from their arrival, lighter, as though a shadow had been lifted from Nora's heart. The reconciliation with her father, imperfect though it was, had closed a chapter that had remained painfully unresolved. Life continued to unfold in unexpected and beautiful ways. The following spring brought the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Jackson, a fair-haired child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quick smile. William, now 3, appointed himself his sister's protector and teacher, solemnly explaining the world to her long before she could possibly understand. Jacob expanded their ranch, hiring additional hands and building a proper house to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors. Nora established a women's educational society that eventually grew into Pine Creek's first public library, housed in a small building adjacent to the expanded schoolhouse. Letters arrived regularly from Bonanza, bringing news of family events and, eventually, word of Henry Fleming's peaceful passing in 1887. Though Nora grieved, the reconciliation had softened the loss, leaving her with memories of forgiveness rather than rejection. In the autumn of 1889, as Nora and Jacob celebrated 7 years of marriage, Martha MacPherson organized a surprise anniversary gathering at their ranch. Nearly everyone from Pine Creek attended, along with Elizabeth, Nora's sisters and their families from Bonanza, and many of the ranch hands and their families. As twilight fell and lanterns illuminated the yard where children played and adults conversed in happy groups, Jacob found Nora standing slightly apart, watching the scene with a contented smile. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. If someone had told that frightened girl leaving Bonanza in the rain that this would be her life someday, she never would have believed it. Jacob chuckled. "No, I think she might have. That girl had remarkable courage and vision, as I recall." Nora turned in his arms to face him. She also had the good fortune to find a man who saw her true self when others saw only defiance and impropriety. "I saw light," Jacob said simply, echoing the words that had become a touchstone of their relationship. "I still do every day." As their guests called for a toast, Jacob and Nora rejoined the celebration, surrounded by the family they had created through both blood and choice. Their children darted among the adults, secure in the knowledge that they were loved unconditionally, free to grow into whatever they might become. In the years that followed, Pine Creek flourished and expanded, as did the Jackson Ranch. William grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's quiet strength with his mother's intellectual curiosity, eventually studying law in Denver, before returning to help establish proper governance for the growing town. Elizabeth, spirited and independent, developed a passion for medicine that led her to become one of Colorado's early female physicians. Through it all, Nora and Jacob's partnership remained the steady center of their world, a living testament to the power of respect, equality, and genuine love. The family that had once claimed Nora brought them shame became a distant memory, overshadowed by the light she had brought to countless lives through her teaching, her community work, and most of all, her courage to forge her own path. And in the quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, Jacob would sometimes take Nora's hand, his eyes still reflecting the same admiration that had been there from the beginning. "You know what I thought the first time I really saw you, standing in my cabin in clothes too big for you but with your head held high?" "What?" Nora would ask, though she had heard the answer many times. "That you were the strongest person I'd ever met," Jacob would reply. "And that whoever had made you believe you brought shame instead of light was the most foolish person alive." And Nora, secure in the life they had created together, would smile and lean her head against his shoulder, grateful beyond words for the storm that had once driven her to a stranger's door and changed the course of her life forever.